Welcome to Living in God's Grace, from Thoughts in Solitude, by the Reverend Thomas Merton, Vegetarian, Part 1 of 2, on Words of Wisdom. The Reverend Thomas Merton, an important Catholic mystic and spiritual thinker, was born in 1915 to an American mother and a New Zealand father. The many life situations he encountered in his youth led him to explore religion and spirituality, and eventually to devote his life to God by becoming a monk and later a deacon at the Abbey of Gethsemane, a part of the Order of Trappists in Kentucky, USA. He also enjoyed living alone in a hermitage in the monastery's wilderness area. During his monastic life, Thomas Merton developed his writing talent by translating religious texts and writing biographies. He also penned poetry, as well as books and articles on topics ranging from spirituality to social justice and peace. One of Merton's most famous statements was, "For me to be a saint means to be myself. Therefore the problem of sanctity and salvation is in fact the problem of finding out who I am, and of discovering my true self." He also said, "We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and God is shining through it all the time. This is not just a nice story or a fable, it is true." Believing in the equality of all religions, Thomas Merton became deeply interested in Eastern traditions in the later years of his life. He also held lively discourses with His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. Today, the life and works of the wise Reverend are still studied at the Thomas Merton Center in Kentucky, USA, and the International Thomas Merton Society. Today, we will present selections from Thomas Merton's book, Thoughts in Solitude, where the wise Reverend tells us the way to be more connected with God. Part 2. The Love of Solitude, Chapter 15. As soon as you are really alone, you are with God. Some people live for God. Some live with God, some live in God. Those who live for God live with other people and live in the activities of their community. Their life is what they do. Those who live with God also live for Him, but they do not live in what they do for Him. They are before Him. Their life is to reflect Him by their own simplicity and by the perfection of His being reflected in their poverty. Those who live in God do not live with other humans or in themselves, still less in what they do, for He does all things in them. Sitting under the same tree, I can live for God, or with Him, or in Him. If I were writing this for Him, it would not be enough. To live with Him, it is necessary to refrain constantly from speech and to moderate our desires of communication with humans, even about God. Yet it is not hard to commune at the same time with other humans and with Him, as long as we find them in Him. Solitary life, essentially the most simple. Common life prepares for it insofar as we find God in the simplicity of common life, then seek Him more and find Him better in the greater simplicity of solitude. But if our community life is intensely complicated through our own fault, we are likely to become even more complicated in solitude. Do not flee to solitude from the community. Find God first in the community. Then He will lead you to solitude. A human cannot understand the true value of silence unless he has a real respect for the validity of language, for the reality which is expressible in language is found face to face and without medium in silence. Nor would we find this reality in itself, that is to say, in its own silence, unless we were first brought there by language. Chapter 16. We find God in our own being, which is the mirror of God. But how do we find our being? Actions are the doors and windows of being. Unless we act, we have no way of knowing what we are. And the experience of our existence is impossible without some experience of knowing or some experience of experience. Hence, we cannot find the depths of our being by renouncing all activity. If we renounce spiritual activity, we can relapse into a certain darkness and peace, but it is the darkness and peace of the flesh. We feel that we are, but the being which we experience is the being of the flesh only, and if we sleep in this darkness and fall in love with its sweetness, we will wake up to perform the works of the flesh. Hence, to find our spiritual being, we must travel down the path made by our spiritual activity. But when we act according to grace, our actions are not ours alone, they belong to God. If we follow them to their source, we will become at least potentially capable of an experience of God, for His actions in us reveal His being in us. The whole of life is to spiritualize our activities by humility and faith, to silence our nature by charity. To go out of ourselves is to act at the very summit of our being, not moved by our own nature, but moved by God, who is at once infinitely above us and who yet dwells in the depths of our being. To rest from this action, I mean to taste the fruit of this action, is to rest in the being of God, above our own being. Where your treasure is, there your heart is also. You appreciate that all the values, treasure, of your spiritual act come from God, and your heart rests in the source from which all that is good in you comes. You do not possess your being in yourself, but only in Him from whom it springs. By faith, I find my own true being in God. A perfect act of faith should, at the same time, be a perfect act of humility. God does not tell His purest secrets to one who is prepared to reveal them. He has secrets which He tells to those who will communicate some idea of them to others, but these secrets are the common property of many. He has other secrets which cannot be told. The mere desire to tell them makes us incapable of receiving them. The greatest of God's secrets is God Himself. He waits to communicate Himself to me in a way that I can never express to others or even think about coherently to myself. I must desire it in silence. It is for this that I must leave all things. Chapter 17. The great work of the solitary life is gratitude. The hermit is one who knows the mercy of God better than others because his whole life is one of complete dependence, in silence and in hope, upon the hidden mercy of our Heavenly Father. The further I advance into solitude, the more clearly I see the goodness of all things. In order to live happily in solitude, I must have a compassionate knowledge of the goodness of others, a reverent knowledge of the goodness of all creation, and a humble knowledge of the goodness of my own body and of my own soul. How can I live in solitude if I do not see everywhere the goodness of God, my Creator and Redeemer and the Father of all good? For more information about Thomas Merton, vegetarian, please visit merton.org.
I've always had a pretty sensitive stomach, but when I cut animal products out of my diet, I felt so much better. Kate Mara, vegan.
Generous viewers, thank you for watching today's Words of Wisdom.